Imagine this. You're sitting in a room filled with every conceivable tool for distraction. A smartphone pulses with notifications. A television flickers with hyper-saturated dramas. A laptop glows with infinite tabs, each promising novelty, urgency, escape. Yet here you are, paralyzed by a void deeper than the digital abyss before you. Your fingers hover over devices designed to addict, but your mind feels like a stone sinking through syrup. The world screams more, and all you can muster is a silent suffocating why. This isn't mere boredom. This is the kind of existential inertia that makes clocks slow and walls press closer. You've felt it in grocery store lines, during Zoom meetings, in the dead hours between midnight and dawn. It gnaws not with the sharpness of pain, but the hollow ache of a question unanswered. Why does everything feel so meaningless when you have everything to live for? Here's the paradox. You are saturated with possibility, yet starved of purpose. You scroll through lifetimes of others' achievements, while your own ambitions dissolve into fog. You crave stimulation, but reject it the moment it arrives, as if your soul has developed an allergy to the very things it's supposed to desire. This isn't laziness, it's a mutiny of the psyche, a silent protest against a life half lived. What if this chronic boredom isn't a flaw, but a coded message from your deepest self? A signal that you've been anesthetized, not by lack of opportunity, but by a surplus of surrender? Consider the evidence. You've mastered the art of existing in a world that confuses motion for progress. You've learned to trade curiosity for convenience, depth for dopamine. But beneath the surface, a dormant force stirs. A part of you still remembers what it means to hunger. Why do we dismiss boredom as trivial when it mirrors the despair of Sisyphus rolling his boulder uphill only to watch it fall again? Why do we pathologize restlessness instead of recognizing it as the shadow of greatness, proof that we're meant to climb, create, transcend? Nietzsche warned of the will to nothingness, the human impulse to numb ourselves when we lack the courage to pursue our true will. But what if your apathy is not resignation, but rebellion, a refusal to settle for the stories you've been sold? Let's dissect the anatomy of this modern malaise. You wake each day to a carnival of choices, yet choose nothing. You orbit, desires like a planet trapped in a dead star's gravity, close enough to feel the heat, too far to be consumed. The psychologist Viktor Frankl argued that the existential vacuum arises not from suffering, but from meaninglessness. But what if the vacuum itself is the catalyst? A merciless mirror held up to the compromises you've made. Think of the last time you felt truly alive. Not entertained, not distracted, alive. Chances are it involved risk, a moment where failure threatened, where your edges were tested. Boredom, then, might be the inverse. A life preserved in amber, safe, sterile, stagnant. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called boredom the root of all evil, not because it corrupts, but because it reveals the gap between who you are and who you fear you could become. So, let's ask the dangerous question. What if your boredom is not a burden, but a compass? A searing reminder that you've abandoned the primal dialogue between your potential and your choices? You've pacified yourself with substitutes, likes instead of love, busyness instead of mastery, outrage instead of courage. But the void persists, relentless, because it was never meant to be filled, only heard. This is the silent war raging beneath your numbness, a clash between the self that accepts half-life and the self that demands eruption. The stakes? Nothing less than your sovereignty, your creativity, your capacity to leave a dent in the universe. But before we arm you for battle, we must descend deeper into the labyrinth. To understand why modern society weaponizes distraction against your awakening, how systems profit from your sedation, and why every spiritual tradition, from Buddhism to Stoicism, treats boredom not as an enemy, but a teacher. The next layer awaits. Turn the key. You are not imagining the walls. They are real, invisible, algorithmic, centuries in the making. The same civilization that gave you electricity, anesthesia, and instant global connection also engineered a cage so seamless you mistake it for the sky. To understand why chronic boredom feels like a spiritual malady, we must excavate the buried machinery of the modern mind. This is not a story of personal failure, but of a war waged against human potential itself. Begin with a truth, so primal it predates language. Homo sapiens evolved to seek, not to settle. Our ancestors mapped constellations, crossed oceans, and painted caves by firelight, not because they had time to kill, but because stagnation meant death. Curiosity was survival. Yet today you inhabit a world where survival is guaranteed, but aliveness is rationed. The psychologist Carl Jung saw this rift coming. The modern man, he wrote, lives in a state of spiritual poverty, surrounded by riches he cannot name. What he couldn't foresee was how those riches would metastasize into weapons of mass distraction. Here lies the first root of the crisis, the hijacking of human desire. Every click, swipe, and notification is engineered to exploit your biological wiring, dopamine loops, shaped by millions of years of adaptation. But where our ancestors chased tangible rewards, food, shelter, kinship, you are fed a diet of synthetic victories, likes, streaks, achievements unlocked. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer grasped this paradox long before smartphones. Human life, he wrote, swings like a pendulum between pain and boredom. Yet even he couldn't fathom a world where boredom itself becomes the pain. Enter the second force, the death of sacred struggle. For millennia, humans derived meaning from tangible battles against nature, tyranny, ignorance. Today, you fight phantoms. A job that pays but does not fulfill. Relationships mediated by screens. Politics reduced to performance art. The existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre called this bad faith, the lie we tell ourselves when we replace authentic struggle with prepackaged identities. You scroll, you consume, you self-optimize, all while a quieter voice asks, "Is this really why I'm here?" But the most insidious root is the third, the colonization of attention. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World envisioned a dystopia where people learn to love their oppression, sedated by pleasure and pacified by trivialities. We arrived there not through tyranny, but through convenience. Social media algorithms, 24/7 news cycles, and the cult of productivity didn't just steal your focus. They rewired your brain's reward system. Neurologically, you're now addicted to the anticipation of meaning rather than meaning itself. Every ping promises revelation, but delivers only hunger. This trifecta, hijacked desire, ersatz struggle, fractured attention, creates what Viktor Frankl termed the existential vacuum. But Frankl's vacuum wasn't passive. It's an active force, a whirlpool that sucks you into what the Stoics called acedia, the paralysis of soul that arises when purpose decays. Ancient monks feared this void as a demon. You experience it as 2 a.m. TikTok spirals and the existential hangover of yet another wasted Sunday. Why don't you revolt? Because the system weaponizes your own psyche against you. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, the repressed, wild parts of the self, explains this perfectly. Society praises productivity, but pathologizes the restless, creativity that disrupts it. You're taught to medicate boredom with consumption. But what if boredom is the medicine? Nietzsche's proclamation that man would rather will nothingness than not will at all cuts to the core. Your chronic boredom is the shadow of your unlived life, screaming to be let into the light. Consider the data. Studies show that people would rather self-administer electric shocks than sit alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. This isn't weakness. It's the terror of confronting the unlived self. the part of you that knows, viscerally, that you're capable of more. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger argued that profound boredom, the kind that strips away illusions, is the gateway to authentic existence. But in a world that pathologizes all discomfort, who dares to linger there? The machinery grinds on. Consumer capitalism thrives on your existential itch, selling Band-Aids for bullet wounds. Want meaning? Buy this self-help course. Want connection? Swipe right. Want legacy? Post your Dusser brand. It's a shell game, diverting your hunger for transcendence into trivial pursuits. Even your rebellions are commodified. Live authentically, screams the influencer selling detox tea. Find your purpose, croons the career coach whose solutions never include burn it all down. Yet in the rubble of these false promises, a pattern emerges. Every great philosophical and spiritual tradition, from Zen Buddhism to existentialism, agrees on one truth: suffering precedes awakening. The Buddha's first noble truth is dukkha, life's inherent unsatisfactoriness. Kierkegaard insisted that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Your chronic boredom, then, is not a malfunction, but an initiation, a call to confront what the poet Rilke called the terror of our enormity. But there's a catch. To answer that call, you must first unravel the lies you've mistaken for laws. That restlessness is a problem to solve. That certainty is superior to exploration. That a life without digital validation is a life unlived. This is where the war shifts inward, to the stories you've internalized about worth, success, and what it means to matter. The stakes? Jung again. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Your boredom is the thread leading out of the labyrinth. Pull it, and the entire false edifice, the cult of busyness, the tyranny of trends, the religion of resignation, begins to unravel. But be warned, the maze is self-repairing. Distractions will multiply. Doubts will arise. The world will redouble its efforts to make you small, comfortable, manageable. This is why the next layer is crucial, not just to understand the trap, but to see how its consequences have already seeped into your bones. You wake to the same ritual, reach for the phone, scan the feeds, dissolve into the digital ether. By noon, your brain hums with fragmented thoughts, half-remembered memes, outrage headlines, a nagging guilt about unanswered emails. By midnight, you collapse into bed, exhausted yet restless, as if you've spent the day climbing a mountain that doesn't exist. This is the invisible toll. The way chronic boredom doesn't just hollow moments, it rewires civilizations. Let's name the first casualty, the atrophy of attention. Neuroscientists have discovered that the brain adapts to perpetual distraction like a muscle adapting to atrophy. Each time you switch tasks, email to TikTok to news alert, you burn glucose and shred focus. The result? A mind that skims but never dives, consumes but never digests. Philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this the hyperattention epidemic, a collective inability to endure the depth required for creativity, intimacy, or breakthroughs. You don't just lose the capacity to read a book, you lose the capacity to think in chapters, but the consequences run deeper than productivity. Consider the erosion of meaning-making itself. Cognitive science reveals that humans construct purpose through narrative, the brain's innate drive to weave events into coherent stories. Yet chronic boredom fractures this process. When every experience is interchangeable, one Netflix show, one political scandal, one viral trend after another, life becomes a montage of non-sequiturs. You stop seeing yourself as the protagonist of an epic and start feeling like an extra in someone else's blooper reel. The psychologist Jordan Peterson warns, without a narrative, life becomes a procession of emergencies. But what if? The emergency is the absence of narrative. Now the second casualty, the normalization of existential numbness. Studies show that prolonged exposure to trivial stimuli dulls the brain's response to novelty, a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. You scroll past wars, climate disasters, and miracles with equal indifference. This isn't apathy. It's psychic callousing. The ancient Stoics practiced premeditatio malorum, imagining worst-case scenarios, to sharpen gratitude. You, however, are bombarded with worst-case scenarios 24/7, leaving you desensitized to both horror and wonder. The philosopher Albert Camus saw this coming. A world that can be explained even with bad reasons is a familiar world. But, on the other hand, in a universe suddenly divested of illusions and lights, man feels an alien, a stranger. Here's where it turns sinister. The rise of pseudo-agency. You've been sold the lie that choice equals control. Playlist curations, filter preferences, customizable avatars, endless micro-choices that give the illusion of autonomy while obscuring your true powerlessness. Behavioral economists call this the ostrich effect, where humans focus on trivial decisions to avoid confronting existential ones. You argue about cancel culture while ignoring the cancer of disconnection. You optimize your morning routine while your soul sleepwalks. It's a devil's bargain. The more you choose, the less you choose. The third casualty is the most dangerous, the death of fertile emptiness. Every spiritual tradition recognizes the necessity of void, the fallow ground where revelation takes root. Buddhists meditate in caves, Christians wander deserts, poets stare at blank pages. But modern life has pathologized stillness. Boredom's generative power, the space where daydreams ferment into revolutions, has been replaced by the compulsive itch to do something, anything. Neurologically, this is a catastrophe. The brain's default mode network, responsible for self-reflection, empathy, and creativity, activates only in undirected stillness. Silence isn't just golden, it's the forge of humanity. Yet you've been conditioned to fear it, to fill it, to mistake the ache of potential for a problem, to solve. Now, zoom out. See the societal rot. When a critical mass of humans lose their capacity for depth, society becomes a hall of mirrors, all surface, no substance. Art becomes content. Relationships become transactions. Politics becomes theater. The historian Yuval Noah Harari warns that in the 21st century, the greatest threat to democracy isn't tyranny, but irrelevance. A populace too distracted to notice they've been sidelined. This is how empires decay, not with a bang, but with a scroll. But the personal toll is even more grotesque. Chronic boredom metastasizes into what psychologists call anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. It's not that you don't enjoy life, it's that you've forgotten how to metabolize it. Your dopamine receptors, bombarded by pixels and promises, now require ever higher doses of stimulation to spark interest. The result? A generation chasing experiences like addicts chasing a high, skydiving, Instagram travel, polyamory, only to find the void intact. The French philosopher Blaise Pascal diagnosed this in the 17th century. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. But today, you've upgraded the disease. You can't sit quietly in a room, even when you're alone. And here's the cruelest twist, the self-fulfilling prophecy of smallness. Cognitive science identifies a feedback loop called predictive coding. The brain shapes reality based on what it expects. If you've trained your mind to anticipate triviality, you'll perceive a trivial world. Opportunities for awe, connection, and growth become invisible. You literally can't see what you've been conditioned to ignore. The psychologist William James observed, "My experience is what I agreed to attend to." But what if you've agreed to attend to crumbs while a feast rots unseen? This is how the trap self-perpetuates. The more bored you become, the more you seek distraction. The more distracted you are, the more bored you grow. It's a Ouroboros of stagnation, A snake eating its own potential. The data is damning. Rising rates of depression, declining empathy, plummeting attention spans. You're living through what anthropologists call a meaning crisis, a collapse in the stories that tell us who we are and why we matter. Yet, this is not a dirge, it's a detonation, because unseen consequences are, by definition, revealable. The moment you recognize the chains, you feel their weight. The moment you feel their weight, you begin testing their strength. The void you've feared? It's not a tomb, it's a womb. The numbness you've numbed? It's the scar tissue over a pulse still beating. But to emerge from this chrysalis, you must confront the hardest truth. Society will not save you. Algorithms will not enlighten you. Comfort will not cure you. The way out is not forward, but down, into the depths you've been taught to flee. Into the boredom that terrifies. Into the silence that speaks. The path is ancient, but the gate is narrow. Few dare to enter, fewer still return. But for those willing to stare into the abyss, to let it stare back, unblinking, something shifts. The walls begin to breathe, the void begins to hum, and the life you thought was yours reveals itself as a shadow. You stand at the edge of the labyrinth, the walls slick with the sweat of 1,000 half-lived lives. Behind you, the hum of the hive, the seductive glow of screens, the well-worn path of what is. Ahead, a cliff shrouded in fog, no map, no guarantees. Just the electric truth that to stay is to die by inches. This is where the rebels are made, not in grand gestures, but in the decision to turn your back on a world that traded your fire for flickers. The rebellion begins with a heresy. Boredom is not your enemy. It is your recruiting officer. Every moment of existential itch, every yawn at the altar of productivity, every twinge of "is this all there is a covert invitation to defect. History's greatest transformers, artists, philosophers, revolutionaries, weren't immune to boredom. They were forged by it. Van Gogh painted starry nights to escape the void of asylum silence. Nietzsche wrote, "Thus spoke Zarathustra," during years of illness-induced isolation. Bob Dylan fled the folk scene's adoration to reinvent himself out Woodstock's woods. Their genius wasn't in avoiding the abyss, but in letting it scald them awake. Here's the first counterintuitive truth. To break free, you must weaponize your boredom, not by filling it, but by facing it. The psychologist James Hillman called this soul-making, the alchemical process of turning leaden emptiness into golden purpose. Start here. Next time boredom strikes, refuse the reflex to numb it. Sit in the discomfort until it morphs. What surfaces? Rage? Grief? A forgotten dream? That's your unlived life pounding on the door. The rebellion hinges on a radical redefinition of power. Society tells you power is control over your schedule, your image, your outcomes. But real power is surrender to the chaos of creation, the vulnerability of desire, the terror of the unknown. The philosopher Michel Foucault understood this. Freedom is the practice of resistance against the tyranny of the normal. Your first act of revolt? Replace "how can I feel better" with "what is this boredom trying to kill in me?" Let's arm you with tactics. Cultivate strategic discomfort. The brain craves homeostasis, but growth demands disequilibrium. Deliberately disrupt your patterns, not with skydiving or Instagram adventures, but with existential jolts. Read a book that dismantles your worldview. Have a conversation where you confess a shameful truth. Spend a day without speaking, just listening. These acts rewire neural pathways, teaching your mind to crave depth over dopamine. As Carl Jung warned, neurosis is a substitute for legitimate suffering. Choose legitimate suffering. Reclaim your attention. Attention is the currency of consciousness. To spend it on autopilot is to surrender your soul. Practice attention aikido, using the energy of distractions against themselves. When the urge to scroll strikes, write a haiku instead. When boredom looms, ask, what's the most dangerous question I could ask right now? The French mystic Simone Weil wrote, attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Redirect that generosity inward. Embrace productive disintegration. Therapy culture preaches self-acceptance, but rebels know you must disintegrate to rebuild. Let your old identity, the people-pleaser, the achiever, the good citizen, crumble. The anarchist Emma Goldman didn't riot against governments, but against the internal tyrants of fear and convention. Start a burn journal where you confess the lies you've lived. Then, in the ashes, plant one seed of truth. What would I do if I weren't afraid? 4. Practice existential sabotage. Society runs on your compliance. Withhold it. When asked, what do you do? Answer with verbs instead of titles. I wonder. I break things. I listen. Reject the cult of urgency. Respond to ASAP with, I'll need 3 days. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, born a slave, became free by mastering this principle. No man is free who is not master of himself. Your rebellion isn't against systems, but the internalized slave driver whispering, you're not enough. Build a shadow network. Every revolution needs allies. Find fellow bored radicals, those who see through the veneer of normalcy. Form underground salons where you discuss forbidden topics, death, longing, the lies you've told for love. Trade. Productivity hacks for vulnerability hacks. The Surrealists did this in 1920s Paris, using games and automatic writing to bypass rational mind control. Your weapon? Shared truth-telling. As the poet Audre Lorde proved, your silence will not protect you, but beware. The rebellion will trigger resistance, withdrawal symptoms from the dopamine drip, friends who label your awakening midlife crisis, the siren song of just be grateful. This is where most fail, mistaking the birth pangs of rebirth for death throes. Here's how to persist. Study the rebels who came before you. When Susan Sontag felt the void, she dove into radical curiosity, writing about camp aesthetics while battling cancer. When physicist Richard Feynman hit intellectual boredom, he learned to play bongos and crack safes. Their secret? Treating life as an experiment in deliberate weirdness. The ultimate rebellion is metaphysical. You must adopt what Kierkegaard called the night of faith mindset, acting as if you're already free. Start small but sacred. Spend an hour doing nothing but watching light shift on a wall. Write a letter to your 100-year-old self. Ask a stranger their deepest regret. These acts reprogram your nervous system to seek meaning, not escape. But the true insurgent knows. This isn't about happiness. It's about potentiation. The Latin root of boredom, tedium, also means irritation. Like a pearl forming around a grain of sand, your potential grows in friction with the mundane. The poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." Let boredom be that wound. As the walls of your old life crack, a terrifying beauty emerges. You begin to see chronic boredom was never your flaw. It was the friction of your wings against the cocoon. The systems wanted you docile, but your soul engineered this itch as an ejector seat. Now comes the final test. Will you let the world shrink you back to size? Or will you take Nietzsche's advice, become who you are, and embrace the vertigo of unbecoming? The revolution isn't coming. It's already here, pulsing in your chest, whispering through every yawn, every sigh, every what if? The EO gate stands open. The abyss awaits. But remember, this is not a leap into darkness. It's a homecoming to light. You are not who you think you are. The life you've been living, the one that feels like a poorly translated poem, all rhythm and no meaning, is a decoy, a placeholder, a shadow cast by a self you've yet to meet, the chronic boredom, the Existential itch, the void that no achievement can fill. These are not flaws in your design. They are coordinates. A cosmic GPS blinking in the dark, repeating one immutable truth. You were never meant to be human. You were meant to become human. Here's the revelation that changes everything. Boredom is the evolutionary echo of your unlived destiny. The same force that drove our ancestors to sail beyond the edge of maps now courses through you, not as a curse, but as a birthright. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger came closest to naming this when he described profound boredom as the suspension of the everyday that reveals being itself. But even he couldn't capture the raw, terrible beauty of what happens next. Imagine peeling back the layers of your numbness like old wallpaper. Beneath the compulsive doing, the curated self, the borrowed ambitions, you find it. A primal yes. Older than language, a hunger that predates fire. This is your daemon, the immortal spark the Greeks believed guided each soul to its destiny. Not your personality, not your roles, not even your memories. The part of you that watched, unimpressed, as you traded wonder for Wi-Fi. This is the ultimate truth. Your boredom was never about your life's emptiness, but its density. Like neutron stars collapsing under their own gravity, your untapped potential has grown so massive it warps the fabric of your existence. The void you've feared is not absence, it's anticipation. The pressure before creation, the silence before a symphony. You mistake it for emptiness because you've been taught to confuse depth with darkness. Every spiritual tradition whispers this in code. The Buddhists say, nirvana is samsara, rightly seen. The Christians, the kingdom of God is within. The quantum physicists, the observer creates the observed. They're all pointing to the same reality. Your chronic boredom is the friction between who you appear to be and what you are. A divine discontent. The universe, in you, becoming conscious of itself. But here's the catch that terrifies and liberates. There is no path to your potential, only annihilations of the lies that hide it. You've been seeking purpose like a lost object when it's the very air you've refused to breathe. The mystic Simone Weil understood attention is the only faculty of the soul that gives access to God, not productivity, not enlightenment. Attention, the raw, unflinching gaze that turns boredom from a prison to a portal. Consider the implications. All those hours you wasted scrolling, they were a modern-day vision quest. The night staring at ceilings, an unconscious meditation. Even your most derailed moments carried the scent of sacredness. The poet David Whyte writes, "The antidote to exhaustion is wholeheartedness." But wholeheartedness begins when you stop seeking meaning and start breathing it, when you realize the ache in your chest isn't a wound, but an ancient rhythm, your pulse syncing with the cosmos. This is why all the self-help hacks failed, why the productivity porn left you emptier. You've been trying to solve your boredom when you were meant to wet it, to let it initiate you into what the theologian Abraham Heschel called radical amazement, the practice of seeing the world as if newborn, not by adding anything, but by subtracting everything that numbs. The final paradigm shift is this. Your potential isn't something you reach, it's something you surrender to. Like a river remembering it's the ocean. The Japanese concept of ikigai, reason for being, gets bastardized as a Venn diagram of passion and profit. But its literal translation reveals the truth. Iki, life, gai, what is worthwhile. Not a balance to strike, but a fire to let consume you. So where does this leave you? With a single seismic choice, will you continue to interpret your restlessness as brokenness or recognize it as the fingerprint of the divine? The psychologist Carl Rogers said the curious paradox is that when you accept yourself as you are, you change. But this is deeper than acceptance, it's recognition. Seeing your chronic boredom as the universe's most intimate love letter. You are more. You are needed. The world is waiting for the gift that only your particular madness can give. The rebels, the saints, the artists, they all heard this call. Van Gogh didn't cure his madness. He let it paint starry nights. Kierkegaard didn't resolve his anxiety. He let it birth existentialism. Frida Kahlo didn't transcend her pain. She let it bloom into surreal self-portraits. Your boredom is their madness. Your numbness, their paint. The hour is late. The distractions are loud. But in the marrow of your being, a revolution stirs. You feel it now, not as a thought, but a tectonic shift. The walls between the mundane and the miraculous are dissolving. That meeting you dread? It contains the seeds of epiphany. That chore you resent. A ritual awaiting sanctification. Even the ads screaming from your screen, they're desperate echoes of a world starving for realness, for depth, for you. So let's end where we began. You're sitting in that room of infinite distractions. But now you know the devices aren't traps, they're mirrors. The TV reflects your hunger for myth. The smartphone, your longing for connection. The laptop, your thirst for creation. The void wasn't outside you. It was you. Or rather, the part of you that's been howling for reunion with the infinite. There's no going back now. To see this truth is to burn the old maps. From here, every moment becomes a sacrament. Every yawn, a prayer. Every flicker of boredom, a flash of divinity saying, wake up, remember. You are the bridge between matter and meaning. The alchemist who can turn scrolling into poetry, small talk into revelation, existence into art. The final question isn't, what will you do with your life? It's, what will life do with you? The chronic boredom was never your enemy. It was the drumbeat to which your soul marches, the rhythm that's been waiting for you to dance. So dance. Dance with your cracks, your contradictions, your cosmic homesickness. Dance with the terror of being truly seen. Dance until the world you thought was real dissolves into stardust, and all that remains is the unshakable knowing you were never lost. You were forging. Now strike the match.